What it do? It do the do, my friend. Oh my god. Troubled God, the best chatter on Twitch. Hello. Blessed. We're already blessed. And Rixie Dalton. Holy oh my god. Watchers. Literally top four. Top top six. Top seven Twitch chatters. Oh my, top eight Twitch chatters. I am 5'10", very tall, giant, one might even say. When I walk around, people are like, oh, it does say doesn't it? We'll change it to politics, just chatting. Wait, hold up.
Then, Taftaj. Hello.
Hello, counterpoints. Should I call you counterpoints or is there another name?
No, you can call me Connor. Let me get you on my screen for my chat. I'm gonna full screen you, and then hi. So, let me transition real quick because basically, like, I was talking to everybody about Ukraine for a bit, and then I gave myself brain cancer, and then I'm still on the verge of having brain cancer and a stroke. And then now we're talking. So, chat. Thank you for watching me have a or like a stroke and cancer simultaneously through the reading of those Twitter posts and going over the Ukrainian situation. And this is my internet friend Taftaj. And Taftaj, can you say hello to the chat and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I talk about politics sometimes and I post sexy pictures online. So if those are interesting, you should follow me.
Nice, very cool. And then, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your politics? Because basically, what I would say is about a month ago we had, I think you made a splash when you first showed up on the internet scene. I think that's fair to say. Then, my good friend Tiberius invited you on to Mask Off, and we had a very interesting conversation about the failures of democracy and kind of the limits of our current constitutional power. Then I think maybe not chronologically, but you also went on the Hippy Dippy a couple of times and also spoke with Destiny about the limits of democracy and maybe what the right wing had to offer the world. And so if you wouldn't mind just kind of informing chat on your stuff. And then I don't really have an agenda. So if you wanted to talk about like political formations and all that kind of stuff, that's fine. If you want to talk about Ukraine, that's fine. If you want to talk about how much you love and hate Twitch and Twitter politics, that's fine. I'm down to go wherever we go.
Okay, right on. Yeah, I talked to Vosh as well, talked to Big Papa
Mhm.
Fascist. So I've sort of made the rounds. I'm a big believer in trying to connect with people who are like very different than me politically. And I tend to go into conversations with like a very, a strong willingness to sort of meet people where they're at. So that's sort of my political style. I don't know. I don't know what to make of like the situation in Ukraine exactly, just because it's such a complicated
Mhm.
foreign policy topic. But yeah, I don't know. It seems like you've been having a go at it lately. What's your take on all the issues?
Yeah, so I'm a little frustrated. I'm coming from like the military background perspective where war sucks and you can't count on all the externalities before they happen. And then I might need to restart my shit. But anyways, let's see if we can roll with it for a second. So basically, like war has a lot of negative externalities. The death of civilians in particular, the death of soldiers, the death of military personnel, all that kind of stuff. It seems like Ukraine's putting up a bigger fight than I think the Russians even expected. Where they're losing more than I think they thought they were going to. And I think they surprised everybody by trying to take the whole country, including me. I didn't think they were going to try to take the whole country. I just thought they were going to try to take the Russian majority areas. And then that's obviously scary and frustrating because we've created this mousetrap.
Oh, I think you've frozen. Or I've lost you. Uh-oh. The Russians have got him. They're taking him down. He's a Ukrainian asset. They know that if he gets these words out, it's over for the Russian invasion. Might.
Yeah, what about now? I went on like a really deep philosophical rant for a minute.
Oh, I'm so sorry we missed it. You cut out. I was messaging you.
No, it's totally fine.
Yeah, the
And
Russians
then let
got
me
to
just
him.
make sure my connection is good on my end because I should have a hardline connection, and I think it's literally. Let me try to do it better. That way, I'm not on Wi-Fi.
Okay. Yeah, whatever works.
Cool. Yeah,
Listen.
let me unfuck my tech first.
Okay.
So we're goddamn geniuses instead of fucking dumbasses. Man, this is frustrating. How much of a boomer are you technologically?
You know, I usually think I'm pretty good, but as soon as you get
Mm,
on stream and you're trying to figure out like tech issues on the fly, it's like 1,000
mm.
times harder. I think
Yeah.
everyone's a boomer in that situation. So,
Well, and then my frustration is like we spend so much time. I have an editor, and like so, we spent so much time unfucking everything, getting the OBS to talk to the Discord and the cameras to talk to everything, and being able to use a camera on multiple platforms simultaneously, and getting the internet like the as good as it can be, and this, that, the other. So it's yeah, it's pissing me off. But give me yeah, I gotta fuck with my hard line because it doesn't look like my chat's coming back on just the Wi-Fi. So I'm sorry. Just give me 30 seconds to unfuck everything.
okay, you do that. Poor counterpoints.
Yeah. And then if you could entertain everybody, that would be awesome.
I'll do my best. I'll try my best. Everyone who's in counterpoints chat, just come to my stream and send me questions. That's what you should do. Come to my Twitch chat, follow me, become a devoted loyalist of Taftaj.
Mm. All right, be right back. Sorry.
All right. Whoa, Snowden tweets in the Taftaj chat. What's the topic of discussion? I don't know. I think we're gonna hit all the classics, okay? All the spicy Taftaj takes we're gonna get to, I think. We're gonna talk about trans stuff, democracy, we're gonna talk about Ukraine. While he's unfucking his internet.
All right, I might disconnect for a second, but I'll be right back. 1 second.
Alrighty. Sounds good. Oh, he's disconnected. Listen, I was playing Elden Ring earlier, and I beat a boss twice on two different characters. Because I made another character because I wanted to try some magic. And I beat like an early stage boss who's like a wolf. which is easy.
Yay.
He's back. Welcome back.
Thank you.
My chat's accusing me of
Give me
lying right now. It's very serious
about what?
accusations. Oh, about the most serious topic right now, which is the release of Elden Ring and whether or
Oh,
not
nice.
I've beaten a boss in it, which I have, and I'll prove it later.
Nice. So I've seen mixed things. All I know is that George R. R. Martin helped do it. The trailer is supposed to be really good. And is it supposed to be in the Bloodborne series or whatever the other series is that's supposed to be hard as fuck?
Yeah, it's very much like Dark Souls in its DNA. Same like combat, same feel and everything, same company.
See, that's a real pain in my ass because if I have to like chain the same attacks like perfectly and then get my ass kicked once, then I'll get furious and eventually throw my controller across the room. So I can't do that shit. I need to be able to respawn and kill things, basically.
It's pretty brutal. It's worse on
Mm.
stream. I,
Yeah, I bet. Yeah,
yeah,
100%.
I
Because then you
keep
get
getting
your ass kicked and
distracted.
it's embarrassing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
No, the worst thing. Okay, so let's start from scratch. Let me give my babies some love. Okay, so Twitch and YouTube. I'm sorry for being on and off for the past like 5 minutes. Obviously, we got fucked up and it was a weird transition, but we're gonna start fresh. Everything's gonna be great. We're gonna manifest our destiny. It's gonna be awesome. And basically, what we're going to be doing is we already did our first segment where we made fun of everybody. We didn't get to make fun of enough right wingers on their Ukrainian cringe, but we did see a majority of the Ukrainian cringe that happened on Twitter within the past week. And then we discussed the scenario at length. Now we're with Taftaj, a very friendly and interesting person who we've already had good conversations with. I think you said that basically you're kind of in the dis-right philosophy, kind of evaluating what's traditional and what's meaningful and all that kind of stuff in the modern world. And that was interesting to talk about. And then also we'll get into hot takes. So there we go. If you want to try to introduce yourself again, and then we can get into it, that would be great.
Yeah, I go by Taftaj on the internet or April if that's easier. I try to present an interesting and different perspective. Usually I'm like center right, so I tend to take like the right's position on most issues, but I don't identify as a Republican, so I take a little bit of a different spin on it a lot of times. And yeah, I go on the internet, have political debates, fun stuff.
So are you so had been you been accused of being like a secret liberal or leftist and or a fascist simultaneously in the past couple of weeks?
I've been told both those things. Yeah. Um,
And is it because you don't hate the gays and the blacks enough? Is that why you're actually a leftist or a liberal?
yeah, and I'm also I don't know, a lot of times like I'm quite comfortable with policies that are considered like left wing if they're proven like through data to be effective. A lot of times like I think I can be swayed, or I think there's like circumstances where they are good policies but there might be like a better policy that's more right wing. So I'm like usually pretty moderate, and so again like my whole political like strategy is to try to find common ground with people and common values and try to pitch my positions that way. So a lot of times when I've talked to like more lefterly people, I've been able to find common ground and they've been like, you sound like pretty reasonable. And for like left wing people, pretty reasonable is like strongly associated with left wings. They'll be like, you're somewhat left wing. And then I've also had people like accuse me of being a secret fascist or whatever, a reactionary.
Well, I wanted to ask about that because some of the ideas that you've posited, some of the concerns for the modern world and kind of like our crisis of meaning and all that kind of stuff. Some of that seemed to come from not specifically like I'm not saying it's just this author who was focused on it, but it seems like some stuff was from Mencius Medbug, who's a dissident
Moldbug.
right thinker. Moldbug, yeah,
Yeah, there's
and.
sorry,
Mhm.
go ahead.
Oh no, please. You take it away. But basically, I would say I've only watched videos on it, and one of the thing I think I misapply some of his ideas. But I did think that some of his descriptions were good. I just thought his prescriptions were dog shit, and that's kind of where I landed. So,
Interesting.
how do you feel?
Yeah, there was a post on Destiny's subreddit where someone
Mm,
was basically saying that they heard a lot of the things that I was saying, and they
mm,
felt that I reminded them a lot of Mensch's Moldbug. And
mm,
I actually had happened to have had a conversation in Discord with another person that day from Destiny's community talking about this very same topic. So I ended up
mm,
just like copy and pasting a lot of my Discord responses, and that seemed to be like, very satisfactory to Destiny's community because I have this like
mm,
habit of responding to them. But basically, like, I think that Curtis Yarvin, he's like sort of dissident royalty in a sense. And yet everyone, like, I don't know, respects his ideas a lot. But I've been like pretty critical of him. I think we have
mm,
similar inspirations. Like, there's this author, James Burnham, who writes The Machiavellians, and I'm a big fan of James Burnham. I'm a big fan of like other artists who, going back in time have made similar critiques that I think Moldbug has drawn on. I think my biggest problem with Yarvin, his name is Curtis Yarvin, his I think my problem with him is that he's like very anti-progressive in the sense that he just looks at whatever the progressive opinion is and tends to take like the opposite of that, even if it sort of doesn't make sense. Um,
mm,
I think that like his willingness to be like playful with a lot of ideas about like race and race realism are sort of examples of
mm,
this, where he sees that progressives are like totally against this idea, so he assumes that the opposite must be true. He writes in this book about like climate change. He talks about how like, oh god, I'm like trying to remember because I read his book a while ago, but he talks about how his like mom didn't like this particular climate activist, and that's like a big point for like why you shouldn't believe in like the current climate science. So I think a lot of his like
mm.
reasoning is sort of shaky, but at the end of the day I do think he makes some interesting critiques of both democracy and the modern liberal project.
Well, and so the idea that I misapply from MedBug that I think is interesting and worthy of consideration is basically like the concept of the cathedral. That there's
Mm,
like
mhm.
a hegemonic power structure within society, and it used to be these power structures, but now it's been replaced. And if you get outside of the orthodox, and I'm all summarizing this from a video, so I could completely be fucking it up. But if you get outside of the hegemonic ideal structure, then basically these power structures will do their damnedest to fuck you over. And even considering things outside of the box or outside of the Overton window can be viewed as kind of like heretical. And it's not heretical in like a classical religious sense, but more heretical in like you're not allowed to think these things or speak these thoughts, basically. So how do you? I want to tell you my misapplication of it because I think I misapply it beautifully. But what do you think about that like description of reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely truth to it. I think when you look at like any political ideology, it's going to have certain hallmarks of like religious thinking. There's going to be like devotees and people who advance the agenda and write theory on it and whatnot. And I think that like Moldbug or Yarvin's idea of like seeing mass media and institutions like higher learning institutions, colleges, and so on, sort of being aligned and therefore being able to dictate a lot of culture. I think that there's a lot of like insight in that perspective. But yeah, I'd be interested to seeing your take on it.
Well, so yeah, so I'm gonna nerd out for my chat a little bit. There's something called Titans in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and they're actually like walking battle churches. They're like these big, like catastrophic or not catastrophic, but like cathedrals that just are covered in like so. Imagine like mech warrior mixed with a church mixed with giant weapons. And I don't view there being like I understand there's a hegemonic cathedral. But I do think that there's cathedrals, basically vying power structures that seem to collate into different groups. So, for instance, like church, family, social conservatism, fiscal conservatism, these are all structures that can kind of align, that can create a political force that needs to be reckoned with. And then you could have liberal progressive academia, maybe some like leftist thinking, like all that kind of stuff, and they can kind of collate into things that like aren't necessarily always going to work in tandem, but are kind of pushing in the same direction. And then these titans vie for the soul of our societies. And so that's where for me, it's not just interesting. It's actually illuminating because if you start thinking about like these factional differences, it doesn't seem as like schizophrenic or confused as our world might seem. Whereas if you kind of can identify the factions that walk hand in hand, where you want society to be and how to push these structures in the direction that you want them to go in, then it becomes less of a confusing mess.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true to some extent. And I think the thing that, like, what Curtis Yarvin would say is that the ways that right wing ideas traditionally like propagate themselves through church or through local community or just through conservative people having children and raising them with conservative ideas are necessarily disadvantaged versus left wing ways of propagation, which is like
Mm.
Hollywood, mass media, the universities, and so on, which have
Mm.
a lot more prestige. There's an Italian author, Antonio Gramsci, famous communist. He wrote these letters from
Uh-oh.
prison. You're
Uh-oh,
familiar with him.
Gramsci. No,
Gramsci.
I'm familiar with how do I phrase this? I'm familiar enough to be dangerous and stupid with it.
Oh boy. I mean, I don't know that much about Gramsci, frankly,
Mhm.
either. But, one of the ideas that he talks about is
Mm.
working on like a very long time scale to institute
Yeah.
communism. And like his theory is that if you can infiltrate like the legal system, the universities, family system, media, and so on, you
Hmm.
can have an enormous degree of influence on culture. And I think that like Gramsci, I'm not going to make the claim that like he's secretly pulling the strings like all these years back. I don't quite go
Oh,
that
I
far
am.
with it. Okay, maybe. But like I will say that like certainly his like prediction of like how you could influence a culture seems very accurate to me. And whether
Mm.
it's the left has, bumbled into this strategy or has intentionally taken it, back from Paulo Freire and those people into the modern time, either way they've sort
Mm.
of ended up with this like winning strategy.
Yeah, so that's the frustration. So I kind of want to describe this because I actually had like, I don't know, a 3 hour conversation with a theory nerd who had actually read Gramsci and was like an anti-leftist, and it was really fun.
Hmm.
Because basically he was talking about like another analogy where basically I kind of forget, you kind of have to think of anti-leftists as an army, and you have to think of leftism or communism or socialism as an army. And apparently Gramsci had he was influenced by the divine, is it the Divine Comedy, or Dante's Inferno?
Dante's
I
Inferno,
forget which.
maybe.
Yeah, the one about hell.
Yeah.
Apparently there's an army of people with white flags, and they're basically a bunch of centrists who can't make a decision about anything. So they're actually neither in heaven or hell. They just like march outside the gates of like both entrances for all of eternity. And what Gramsci allegedly said was like, the goal is not to get everybody to join your army and your battle lines and your artillery. The goal is to get as many people into the army of white flags as possible. And then the follow up goal is to get as many people as possible into your army. And then economic catastrophes are your artillery bombardment. And then you have to secure footholds and wins through culture because the capitalist hegemonic project, and I could be totally butchering this, by the way, but the capitalist hegemonic liberal project will fuck you up at any chance if you try to confront its power structure directly. So if you're dealing with an entrenched liberal, democratic, Republican, mixed economy capitalist system, overthrowing that is almost impossible if you come at the power structure straight on. So you kind of have to use economic catastrophes as your bombardment, cultural warriors to establish your footholds and gain ground, and then convince as many people as possible to back away from the conflict, so you can gain more ground. And that's kind of a summary of what my friend summarized for me, basically.
Yeah, that seems like a good reading of the idea for sure. And it's very much like a long-term, long time scale sort of strategy for gaining cultural power. And
Mhm.
I think that a lot of politics like essentially flows from the culture. And so, you know, I'm one of these people that I think that, just voting like every 40 years in
Mhm.
whatever election, I don't think that that's like how you really gain political power. Like it's almost worthless. I think that if you want to make real political change, you have to start on the level of cultural or intellectual movement and try
Mhm.
to win over people's minds first.
So, what do you think? This is my problem with the right, and this is my super deep frustration. I think we might have talked about this last time. But the right doesn't have a positive vision of the future. They have the ability to drag their feet on what the left wants to do, and they have the ability to complain, but they don't have anything to offer, particularly Americans, anything besides tax breaks and culture war bullshit. And so that's kind of where, for me, I view like modern American electoral conservatism as completely fucking bankrupt. And I'm terrified because I think that leftists and progressives, not even liberals, I think leftists and progressives have a positive vision in the world, not insofar as like it is a positive agenda, but they have at least a vision to offer. And I don't know how long a political movement can be sustained if it doesn't have a vision of what the future looks like. And I'm scared of that.
I mean, I think that like maybe I think that the left has like a positive vision for what the government should do. And I think
Hmm.
on the right, there's oftentimes their goal is to move responsibility away from the federal government and towards other cultural institutions. And so, like, I think a right wing idea would be to like dismantle certain government programs and then have programs like on the level of like church or state or private company come in to like fill that gap.
But how's that going?
What do you mean?
I don't know about you, but I feel like they have the slash part of it down where they can eliminate the government, but then the follow through to actually establishing, I don't know, charity or private organizations or companies that actually pay their employees a living wage or actual religious communities that have something to offer their constituents. I feel like a lot of that stuff, there's no follow through. So they just have the slashing of public infrastructure, but they don't have any follow through on the private replacement.
Yeah, so this is I think you're right and you're getting to something important with this. And that's that if we were to cut, for example, the minimum wage, that would probably be detrimental because in the United States, we use the minimum wage as sort of like a proxy for the ability of people to engage in collective bargaining. We're basically saying that, like, we're going to force all of these companies to pay this minimum, and it's going to benefit like this certain stratum of the economy, these workers. And if you look at countries, for example, Denmark doesn't have a minimum wage, and yet they're able to argue for and bargain for much higher wages on average for these people in the lowest wage earning stratum of the economy because they have such a strong union presence. And so in the United States, you get rid of the minimum wage, you get rid of certain labor protections and so on the federal level. There's nothing to replace that, right? And so it would probably be bad for a lot of people. But I think that if you look at the more Denmark model, where those things are managed by unions and not by the government necessarily, maybe unions are given like some benefit in the government, but the government is not making these decrees across the board. You get better results overall. And so I think what happens is that when the government comes in to an industry and says, we're going to force these sorts of concessions, or we're going to provide this sort of welfare, there's no longer demand for that sort of welfare to come from things like unions, for that protection, that bargaining to come from unions, or that welfare to come from church or state or whatever, because the government's doing it. And so people turn away from these communities. They don't try to organize in these ways. And so we end up with a much more fractured and atomized society where people like Hassan, you know, their
Uh,
community is seen as doing a lot of good because they advocate for these national level policies, and yet they don't do anything to really help their local community when they have millions of dollars that could really change the lives of so many people around them, just because so much is wrapped up in national politics.
you're like hurting me physically.
Why is
like,
that?
cause like, okay, yes, that's the problem. And here's my thing is, so I get frustrated because I feel like labels in our political milieu have power. So if somebody says like, oh, that's Cotter, you know, he identifies as centrist and he has some pretty chud takes, but realistically he's just like a liberal progressive or whatever. I think that undermines my credibility with right wing people who I deeply care about, and who I have a lot of like parroted talking points for, because I think family's important, self sufficiency, responsibility, trying to get as many things away from the government as possible, rebuilding private communities. Like all of these things are like super important to me. But at the same time, because I'm willing to say things like, hey, maybe we should eliminate the minimum wage, but bring back unions, then lefties are like, oh, you said the word union, you must be a leftist. And I'm like, no, like I'm trying to make sure that like Americans, working class and middle class Americans, have a decent wage so they don't have to be reliant on the government to give them like basically slave wages,
Great take,
and
by
then
the
they
way.
get gutted. Yeah, and then they get gutted culturally, and then we don't even have a culture anymore. We don't even have like the in my problem with like leftism or leftists is they want to solve every problem through government intervention, and not only are they completely like ignorant of the almost willfully ignorant of the fact that what they're requesting necessitates increased like reduction in their ability to thrive as free people. And that's what really frustrates the piss out of me, because like, so because I'm not for like lower taxes, I'm not on the right. Because I don't hate black people, I'm not on the right. Because I don't hate gay people, I'm not on the right. But then if I look at like leftist policies, or what leftists want, what people Hassan want, I think it's fucking disastrous. I
Mm.
think it's cataclysmically disastrous if they ever actually achieved power. And then I'm so black pilled and terrified of the younger generation, because right now I probably have like 100 and some odd people watching me. You probably have 100 and some odd people watching you. Hassan's got 30,000 dumb fucks watching him. And I just wonder like what the future of the world looks like when somebody that stupid is that appealing. It's terrifying to me.
Yeah, it's rough for sure. I especially feel it like in my generation, just trying to socialize with people, or
How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?
I'm 21.
Okay.
Yeah. So I definitely get this, especially in like the queer community. People are so extraordinarily far left. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's rough for sure. Um, you see it on TikTok too. People are just so far in one direction, and it's definitely worrying. But at the same time, I think that a lot of people are very frustrated with the
Mhm.
progressive movement and where it's gotten people. And I also think that like the progressive movement and its tendency to like viciously like cancel its own members and infight and so on, I think that it is like unstable in many ways. And I think that the responsibility of like right wingers and anyone who's just like wants to present an alternative viewpoint is really just to like lay out facts like in the barest way possible, and help push people towards maybe better conclusions.
But okay, but then this is where I get again really frustrated, and I'm not trying to say it's like pure jealousy, but it feels like the room for these ideas is really tight, and by that I mean it's hard when right wingers, young right wing people, are told, hey, basically being on the right wing means lower taxes and the government does everything. Or not the government does everything. The government does nothing, basically. It's like neo-minarchism. And if you're not like a neo-minarchist, anti-racist, so there's really two options. You can either be like a Christian nationalist who's a little bit racist, but not totally racist.
But very homophobic,
Or
probably.
but very homophobic. Or you can be a non-racist minarchist, and those are like the two, like socially acceptable paradigms that you're allowed to be on the right. Whereas if you're like but here's the thing: I'm not homophobic, I'm not transphobic, I'm not racist. I do think Christianity is important, but I'm not specifically religious myself, and I do think a lot of the moral lessons of Christianity are important and have to be replicated. But I'm not like devoutly religious, so that throws me out of the tradcon group. And then with the minarchists, they're so obsessed with slashing the social safety nets with no replacements that I view them, because they're so obsessed with minimizing state power. I don't think they'll ever wield it.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like almost politically irrelevant. So I can't get into that camp either. And then when I look at the left, the liberals are smug, self-satisfied douches who, frankly, are ineffectual because they've already won the game. Progressives are annoying as piss, but sometimes you can get almost an idea out of them. And then leftists I view as catastrophically dangerous. So it's like there's nowhere to go.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's frustrating, but I also think we're probably in very similar camps here, where
Mm.
we both recognize that when like you destroy governmental programs with nothing to like fill that vacuum, it's going to be like very destructive, at least in the short term. And so I think maybe recognizing that is the first step to saying, well, maybe when you slash these like programs, there needs to be like some sort of interim policy which encourages the development of something else to take its place on, the local level or the community level, some sort of grant for something. I think that might be like a good step towards making some of these ideas more amenable, or just enabling in the United States different states to pursue policies that might work for the people within those states. For example, like California is a huge state with a massive economy, bigger than many countries over the world, and in theory is totally capable of creating some kind of public healthcare system within its borders for Californians. And so that might be a good testing ground to implement some of these progressive ideas, and progressives can see how they work in those states. Sure, go for it.
But
um,
but this is my thing, is like I just see fucking disaster. Like I see disaster now. I see disaster on the headline, and the segmentation and the polarization of the country is like that's fucking frustrating to me by itself. It's like, listen, you need temperamentally right-wing people in order to make your society function because they care about order. You need temperamentally liberal and progressive people in your society because they need to be able to push things forward. We need each other. So the segmentation and specialization of American politics is actually really frustrating to me, because I feel like we've been propagandized into thinking we don't need each other when we obviously do. And so I'm fucking furious because I'm looking for adults, like people who are my age or older, to step into the room and say, hey, that's enough of that bullshit. Let's get our shit together as a country and let's do this and let's do that. And I'm looking around and nobody's fucking speaking up. They're all propagandizing people to their own fucking personal benefit, and it's super blackpilling. And then what I was going to say, so I have a vision. I have a vision of the future. I don't think that you can create like a temporary private transfer grant while slashing public safety programs. I think you have to create the parallel systems first.
Hmm.
And so what I want to do, because, obviously I'm going to be a super successful Twitch and YouTube politics streamer, and I'll have $2.5 million a year in order to back my ideas. So when that happens, I want to start creating the parallel structures. I want to start basically, building digital and in real life communities that work off of mutual aid and work off of maybe not a specifically religious bend, but still the idea that like, hey, you have energy and you have time and you have the ability to do good in the world, and you need to take a tenth of your talents and pay it forward to your community. And we used to, sorry for ranting so much, but we used to have these ideas like the zakat in Islam or the tithe in Christianity, where you would take a fraction of your bounty and put it towards the community. And secular people don't have that. They're all a
Hmm.
bunch of fucking isolated twats.
So they need the
Um,
government, naturally.
well, right, but then the government does what it does, which
Hmm.
is unfortunately dog shit, and basically eliminates the need for the community while also atomizing and secularizing everybody.
Yeah.
So if we want to get around that, then we have to say, even though the government's taking 20% of my check, I'm going to take another 5 to 10% of my check, and I'm going to put it towards building the community that I want to see in the world.
Yeah.
At least that's my vision.
I think that's also, a very good strategy. And the end result is when people engage in these local communities and they realize that they can get a lot of fulfillment out of them, both
Mhm.
in this sort of like, I'm going to say spiritually, but what I really mean is like the ability
No, I
to
agree with you.
network.
Spiritually, even without a god.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
100%.
But also like materially, right? When you give to your community and they're able to give back to you and help you out through difficult times and so on, that's the kind of thing that I think makes people, a lot less, they have a lot less need or desire for the government to come in and step in and take that role for them. And so they're going to be like less needing of those government policies and those government safety nets. And I think that that's another way, if you want to ultimately dismantle them, you do create those parallel systems, and then people desire the safety nets less or need
Well,
them
and can
less.
I ask you this question, because this is something where I feel like I see leftoids, they don't even know where they want to go.
Hmm.
I think on one hand they want society to become so desperate that they turn to leftists for solutions. So they don't want to solve the problem, because then that would rob the revolution of its fire. Because you're solving the material conditions that would make the make revolution possible. But then on the other hand, I do see a lot of people talk about like harm reduction, for instance, where they're saying like, oh well, we have to do this or we have to do that because there's so much harm, that we basically, it's a moral obligation of ours to reduce the harm of human beings in the world. And so for me, I see them kind of waffling back and forth, where they seem to want to improve the world because that's what their moral compass causes them to, or charges them to do. And then I also see them kind of like backing off because they don't want to make things so good that they rob the revolution of momentum.
Okay,
I don't know if I said that in English or not.
well, yeah, what's an example of this?
So I would say with like Vosh and Hassan in particular, like both of them have accumulated, like Vosh to a lesser degree, but still truthfully so. He has enough money that he could alleviate some of the material lapses in people around him, or start mutual aid projects, or charitable streams, or stuff like that. And he has done stuff like that in the past, but it hasn't been a central part of the message. The central part of the message is entertainment to promote socialism. That's the central message. And so that's where for me it's like, do both, you know? Do both simultaneously. You have the power, you have the clout, you have the influence. What are you waiting for? You know?
Yeah, and I think it's
With Hassan, he's a fucking idiot. So I don't really like, I don't know. I hold him to a higher standard because he has more power. I hold him to a lesser standard because I think he's a fucking idiot.
well, I think like on a strategic level, right? It may in fact benefit like socialist type people to not invest in their local community and therefore make people like more reliant on the government, right? If instead you put all your millions to like advocating for or pushing, certain politicians' candidacies, that might be like politically effective, but it's definitely, I think we'd both agree, like not good for the local community for you to totally just like not help them at all. It'd be much better if you invested that money locally and tried to really make a difference.
Yeah, and this is one of my main problems is the spiritual fucking, like, a lot of these people are materialists. For in like I'm not like a theist, like I'm maybe a deist, and the difference being like, maybe there's a God, he set everything in motion, it could be conscious, unconscious. I don't know if there's an afterlife, whatever. I'm not a specifically religious person. But I was raised religious and I understand a lot of the teachings or whatever. I think a lot of these people seriously see a anti-work world in which you can hook yourself up into the heroin masturbation machine 24/7 as like, I don't want to say ideal, but as like a morally neutral proposition. Whereas I see it as like the devolution of humanity. And so that's where we're both joined in the causes of alleviating the suffering of sentient creatures, and then we're completely disaligned on what that looks like. And that's where for me it's like, let's join on the larger moral perspective, but then you got some really fucked up perspectives that basically are borderline evil. Like that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm sure they think I'm evil too, because I make moral judgments that require people to develop in specific ways that they see as negative.
Yeah. I mean, I think it gets like a very fundamental sort of disagreement about what is morally true or worth pursuing. But I
Mm,
do personally believe that there's a lot of good reasons to try to not be a utilitarian or to not be someone who's like purely interested in pleasure. I think
hmm
that you have to be really the kind of person who's willing to like commit to principles,
mm.
and towards like the long-term benefit of people and not just the short-term consumption and promotion of pleasure in your life. And I think that when you look at a lot of left-wing causes, left-wing political positions, a lot of it boils down to just like allowing people to engage in that like most base and most simple sort of pleasure seeking behavior with like
hmm
as few consequences as possible. And while like I'm very much like someone who's pro freedom, I think there needs to be an emphasis on, you know, on the fact that that's not the best way to live.
The right, and then this is where I get all fucking Jordan Peterson on people. I lived the hedonistic life for quite a while, and to be honest, I had fun.
Mm.
Like basically doing sexy things can be fun. And doing drinking and smoking weed and all that kind of stuff. That stuff can be fun, but it can also be shallow. It can also be empty. It can also not be the highest calling of your life. And the correlation between responsibility and a sense of purpose, I think, is an important thing that Jordan Peterson specifically, and I'm sure people throughout history have articulated, where the life is not just a playground that you get to, jerk off and ride the water slide and do drugs until you die. That's not life. That's a part of life, it's a component of life, but it's not all of it. And some of the most rewarding shit you will do on this planet is going to have a correlated amount of responsibility and difficulty. And telling that to tech and dopamine addict young people, it's a tough sell, but I also, when I hear like I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I have no sense of meaning in my life, I don't have any friends, I don't have this, I don't have that, then I'm like, motherfucker, like there's a bunch of like religious and communitarian and moral fucking lessons that you reject because of anti-theism, but they have important things to tell you and you should consider them.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that like Kierkegaard has this great quote about the aesthetic man pursuing distractions from distractions from distractions. Like his whole
Mm,
life is just trying to distract himself from the meaningless of life. And he does this by pursuing like every pleasurable thing imaginable. And in the modern world, like we exist in an abundance of pleasurable things, from sugar to drugs to
Hmm.
pornography to video games to everything. Everything that is around us is designed to be ultra pleasurable. And yet, when we look for like satisfaction and long-term meaning, that's the kind of thing that doesn't come from distractions or pleasure. Like you
Mm.
mentioned the anti-work movement. That's the anti-work movement is really scary to me in a way,
Mm.
because I think you should want to sacrifice for something. You should have something in
Mm.
mind that's worth sacrificing for, whether that be your family or your community or your God, right? You should have something that makes you want to get up and work and be tired and, you know, improve the lives of people. And that, like, that pain of dedication is really where a lot of people find meaning. And so I think the left has like continually sold people on these distractions. And we've seen like how incredibly toxic it can be, right? Like, there's an anxiety, a depression, a suicide, and an opioid epidemic in this country. We're the richest nation on earth, the richest nation in the entirety of human history, with access to the greatest knowledge ever conceivable. And yet people are killing themselves. And I think that's when you get to that point, you have to realize that there's something seriously, seriously wrong.
Well, and so I'm okay with taking stock of reality and saying like people are dying from obesity, people are dying from suicide, people are dying from what do they call it? Like diseases of despair and psychological issues and all that kind of stuff. And recognizing the victory in that. Okay? Because there is a victory in this, which is you're not getting eaten by a fucking lion or like getting sacrificed in the Colosseum. You know that there's a victory in that. But oh man, god damn it. I'm gonna fucking be so corny right now. There was a quote I hate myself. That in Batman, it's whatever one has Tom Hardy and Bane in it, and it's like victory has defeated you. And while it's just pop culture bullshit, the reason why that line hits so hard is because I think that not having purpose, not having meaning, not having organization, not having a higher order thing to strive for can cause you to defeat yourself by no longer pushing yourself for something new. And so that to me is the terror of modern existence, where like I was in the Marine Corps, I was in law enforcement, I bumped into a lot of really hardcore shit that affected my life, and some of it literally fucked me up for the rest of my life, and some of it was the coolest shit I've ever done. But now I can enjoy um the smaller things because I feel like I already did my adventure. Whereas I feel like if I had just like, I don't know, been a teenager and just jerked off my entire life and played video games my entire life, I feel like I would have missed out on something, you know? Whatever that something was. I think every person, whether it's like sexual or drugs or war or physical conflict, or public service or something like that. I think everybody needs that external experience so they can know themselves, so they can enjoy the rest of life.
Yeah, I think that's true to some extent. And one of the things that, like, I think sort of worries me about where we're at culturally and societally is that things aren't bad. In many ways, things
Mm.
are very good. And I don't think that like the real horror is in suffering, but
Mm.
rather in like this apathy and sluggishness and like
Mhm.
an unwillingness to change things. Because when things are okay, when they're like good enough, that's not what inspires people to really stand up, step up, and change things dramatically. And so I
Mhm.
think there's maybe like a window in which people, when things like aren't, you know, totally just like um while you're not like living in a pod off of soil and consuming the latest media and getting
Mhm.
your pleasure receptacles tingled just enough, because like that's the realistic end result of the pleasure machine. It's not that you
Mhm.
go into a box and then you feel like you're being like socked off like every second for the rest of like eternity. The realistic like result of that is
Oh
you
no! Now
switching
you're
like
designing the perfect pleasure machine. Shit.
the better, like the more realistic pleasure
April's
machine.
improving it. Fuck. No, no, this is so bad because now you've improved it. Because basically, like, if it was like you're getting sucked off every second of every day of your life,
Mhm.
then people would grow, like they would get tired of it because it'd be so intense. Like, you wouldn't be able to deal with that much pleasure for your entire life. Whereas if you design the subtle
Mhm.
pleasure machine with exactly enough dopamine and exactly enough serotonin, and oh god, no, you
And that's
just
just
made
like that's like mediocre, like good enough
the
Marvel
mediocre,
movies
the
forever.
god
That's the
pleasure machine.
existence. You walk in and it's just like Spider-Man movies. You're like, this is
No,
okay
no,
forever.
oh no, oh god, you just made the pleasure machine worse. How did you do that? Like, no. See, I was already terrified of the pleasure machine when it was just like you're high on ecstasy and getting sucked off for like all of eternity. And that's supposed to be like, some version of like almost like what we would conceptualize as heaven, right?
Mhm.
And then you just made it worse because instead of it being like a 10 out of 10, where you're like, well, that sounds too intense. I'm sure I would get bored of it eventually. You just made it like a solid 6.66666 out of 10. So you're
Yeah.
just like, ah, that's all right.
Hmm.
You know, that's all right. It's Spider-Man with what's that guy's name? Tom Holland.
Tom Holland.
Like
Yeah.
he's
It's like
yeah, he's
solid.
entertaining. He's a good guy. He's cute. He's fun. Like, yeah. All right. Fuck. No. Sorry. I'm like still having like consequences from that thought.
But like, it's not
Oh,
bad. It's not like a bad existence. You're not suffering. You're not in pain, right? You're like
right.
provided for. And so, like, how willing is, a person in that kind of existence, like, rise up or significantly change things or rock the boat? Probably not super likely. And I think that, like, unwillingness is what's
But
dangerous.
but is that so I guess that's the question, is this a cultural so does this problem have a cultural solution where we say, hey, here's all the great thinkers of the past, here's all the great thinkers of the present, here's the existential crisis that we find ourselves in, here's the spiritual crisis that we find ourselves in. This is where we think the path is going forward. And if you want to come on, come on. But if you don't, then you do you, right? That's kind of the liberal approach. Or is this like a existential cultural crisis that demands the intervention of either the state or the church or something similar to the state or the church to say, no, like you will not go into the 0.66666 pleasure machine. You will go into you will strive for something purposeful for the rest of your, for the beginning of your life. And then once you've achieved something and, we'll show you how, then you can go into the, some level of mediocrity when you're older. Like that's who says it? Who says it's bad? And is it bad enough that we do something about it, or is this just some cultural criticism and pushback, and an alternative vision of the future that you just present to people?
Um, I mean, I think that a big factor in this is like the influence of tech companies
Hmm.
on
But
how
they're
we
the pleasure machine. We already know that. We know
right.
what side they're on.
Yeah, and so like the need for these companies to create like ever more addictive, apps that keep you like continually scrolling and have these detrimental effects long term. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see, a bubble burst with big tech in the same way that we've seen bubbles burst in the past, where, Silicon Valley like investment, the investment cycle where companies just like grow and grow and grow but like produce very
Mm.
little. I wouldn't be surprised if that bursts and we see like a lot more regulation, cracking down on these companies. I think that's like,
Where would that come from? Because a lot of these people are addicts and they're not interested in the regulation.
I mean, I
So
think,
for instance, even me, I wouldn't say like Twitter's a fucking hell site, but I love it and I'm addicted to it as much as everybody else is. So I wouldn't want it like banned. So what? So where is the impetus going to come from to actually change these things? Because this is like to me this kind of borderline sounds like alcohol and prohibition, where we know
mm,
alcohol is bad for us, but then we try to prohibit it, and then people are so addicted that they're just like fuck you, we're gonna do it anyways.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, I think that in the United States, you see a history of technologies becoming very large and then, getting regulated by the government. And in their sort of like Wild West days, when a technology explodes onto the market, there's not a lot of understanding about how to regulate it, what its effects are, etc.
mhm.
You see this also with like the financial industry. There was a time when like stock markets were like not very regulated at all. Financial trading was not very, regulated, and then it became very regulated and deregulated and so on. But I think that like we've had this explosion with internet technology, and for the most part, it's been either not very regulated or we've left a lot of regulation to companies themselves. I think
Mhm.
that if there's ever a scenario where people are losing faith in big tech companies and the music stops in Silicon Valley and investors are getting scared and this like big financial backing in this area goes away or is just like startled. I think then you'll have like more of a cultural reanalysis of these sorts of things when they're not so backed by so much financial capital.
But here's my problem with that. We were
Mhm.
talking about like a crisis of meaning, a crisis of spirituality, a crisis, and like I'm not talking about religion. I'm just talking about like purpose. And how basically the world is now in like a very predictable hegemonic state where basically like socially, culturally, corporate culture, all that kind of stuff, it's basically lib progressive, right? And then it seems like there's some readouts of social conservatism, but they all seem helpless against the tide. And then it seems like there's some actual leftists, like socialists, communists, all that kind of stuff, who are waiting in the wings, who are using liberal progressivism as like a vehicle through which to spread their ideas. That seems to be like our current cultural status quo. It seems like, for me anyways, the liberal, hegemonic, progressive, whatever PC fucking culture is basically the one that would be in charge of the regulation when it came. So that the tech giants that were all saying like, oh well, they're in charge of the regulation right now or whatever, or they're in charge of self-regulating. I think they would be the ones writing the fucking laws when people were in a panic. And so that's where for me, I'm not worried, but I do think that they're going to capitalize on that clamor just to basically solidify their hold on the 7 out of 10 pleasure machine. That's my guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's plausible. I think that like one of the things we talked about earlier in this discussion is how if you want to make big cultural changes, it's like very hard to just take things on like from the head because you're not going to get
Mhm.
anywhere really. And it sort of feels like if you were to take like any strategy, like if I were to go out and just think like, okay, I want to like totally shake up mass media and change the way that it works and inject into it like a broader diversity of opinions and maybe really force people to question like the progressive media. That would be ridiculously hard. If you wanted to like reorient how big tech works and make it not so controlled by like these progressive like by these progressive ideas, if you wanted to do that, change up like the foreign policy infrastructure, etc., I think a lot of
Mhm.
these things would just be like they're going to feel very impossible. Um, but I think that there needs to be like a willingness for people to start like a cultural reconsidering of these ideas. And I think the thing about like any political belief or position or era of history is that there's going to be times when it weakens or when it loses confidence, and you need to be ready then to offer up an alternative. And it can't be
So,
guaranteed
so
that it's
a,
going to
so a
work,
tech
but
shakeup, a tech shakeup is the fucking socialist artillery bombardment. What's your artillery bombardment? Sounds like you're waiting for it. Like what do you? And then also on top of that, if there were okay, so let's say that this like you said, in the cycle, there's tech innovation, there's the Wild West, and then there's going to be a catastrophe, and there's going to be a clamor for control. And then during that clamor for control, there's going to be an opportunity.
Mhm.
And people who are savvy or intelligent, while they might not win the entire war, they can at least carve out a space for themselves, right? So I guess my question is, so how do you view this as I would say like there's a lot of terms, right? But the neo-reactionary, dissident right, whatever thought process. You seem to philosophize around that like ilk, but that ilk is filled with tradcons, tradcasts, neo-reactionaries, anti-Semites, anti-globalists, isolationists, and basically like a whole bunch of people who don't seem to have a firm grasp on what's possible, but more have a grasp on what their idealized world would be. So my problem with you kind of like swimming in those waters and saying like, "Hey, we could do something," is I don't think there's like a coalesced vision even amongst the alternative media. So do you have a coalesced vision? Do you have something in the future, or do you just think that it's like an inevitability that through dialectic we're eventually going to arrive at some kind of new right?
Um, no, I don't think it's an inevitability. And I think that when you look at like the current right-wing movements that are popular, you're calling out a few of them, like the tradcaths or like the racists, the race realists, like alt-right types. If you look at these groups, I think that there's a strategy in their political ideology, and that's
Mhm.
that when you take on political stances that are so obviously outside of the mainstream, I think what you're doing is you're putting up a beacon to anyone in the culture to see, okay, this person is willing to go against the grain, and therefore if I also want to go against the grain, I should look to them for that sort of guidance, right? And I think
Mm.
that's a little bit scary, because I think that these sorts of beliefs, for example, like racism, I think is like a really negative, awful, pernicious, toxic element. But it's also helped this movement to establish itself as like very clearly outside of the mainstream, and therefore attract a lot of more dissident types of people. That's scary to me, and I think that prevents a lot of like moderate or reasonable people from engaging with right wing ideas, because you have these like extreme elements and groups that take on these very toxic ideas as an actual strategy of propagation. So I think that like what I want to do really on Twitch and elsewhere is to present a vision of right-wing thinking that it doesn't have those toxic elements, that
Mm.
goes to these moderate people. Like I had a conversation with Vash. We talked a lot, and we were able to agree on a lot of things. I was able to get him to make concessions that I never expected him to make. And I've been able to talk with Destiny and able to get him to make concessions that I never expected. And I think that I'm able to do this because I don't stick to these pernicious elements of the right wing. I'm
And
not a Mencius
mhm.
Moldbug or a Curtis Yarvin who looks at everything the progressives are doing and takes the opposite. I try to be very moderate while also presenting a vision of, a right wing world, a right wing future.
So okay, so for me, like right wing. So I think back to the French Revolution, basically with the the secular pro democratic movements, and then also like the institutionalists, right? And then I think in the United States in particular,
Also, thank you so much, CTV. That
our
was really nice. Thank you so
institution,
much for the raid.
as much as other kinds of right wingers might not like it, is constitutionalism,
Mm.
is kind of liberalism, like hegemonic liberalism. So for me, being an institutionalist, it means I'm loyal to the republic. I'm loyal to conservative, republicanism, and also to the Constitution and all that kind of stuff. But these are pretty liberal and libertarian frameworks. You know what I'm saying? So on one hand, it like makes you an institutionalist. On the other hand, it makes you a liberal or a libertarian. So I guess my question is, when I'm getting a lot of concessions from people, because I'm kind of like an adaptive person, I'm an agreeable person. I like to consider other people's thoughts. I wonder, it's like, well, did I change my mind? Did this person have a part of their worldview that I want to incorporate, and am I closer to them than I think, or did they agree with me where there's something good here that could be built out and achieve my goals? So how do you keep because we talk about like you were accused simultaneously of being a leftist and a fascist simultaneously. I've had that done dozens, if not hundreds of times. How do you keep your vision clear when everybody's trying to claim you as their own and then also rejecting you simultaneously? How do you keep that clear in your head?
What do you mean, keep it clear in my head?
So you're agreeing with Vosh,
Hmm.
and then you go, "Oh, maybe I'm a dirty fucking socialist." And then you're agreeing with Destiny, and then you're like, "Oh, maybe I'm a fucking lib." And
Mm.
then you're agreeing with Cultured Thug, and you're like, "Maybe I'm a neo-Nazi." like 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 obviously like there's going to be this so for me there's going to be things that I viscerally disagree with all of these people. With Vosh, I disagree with him on socialism. I'm not a
Hmm.
leftist. I'm an anti-leftist. I'm just not a fucking racist. And then with Destiny, we agree on a lot, but he's also I know that he's like been a little bit more conservative recently, but he's a hedonist and a
True.
nihilist. And I hate that shit. I hate it so goddamn much. And then I'm trying to think of what else, but basically, there's going to be hard places where we viscerally disagree, and there's going to be places where we agree, and it's hard to keep it like articulable and bring people closer to what I want for their lives, which I do think is basically like politically liberal, individually conservative. That's what I would want. I would want to live in a liberal or libertarian society, but I would want individuals to still exercise responsibility and goal setting and being good human beings and taking care of their families and building communities and all that kind of shit. So that's where it's like individually liberal, but then oh no, excuse me, individually conservative, but then governmentally liberal. And that's a hard vision to forward because it only requires slight changes of people.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess I differ a little bit from you politically, where I don't
Mhm.
necessarily think we should be like governmentally liberal. I think it would be better if we were like, I don't know, more conservative in both of these realms. But
Mhm. Can
of
I can
course,
I ask that specifically like you mentioned posting sexy pics on the internet.
mhm.
That would not be something that typically correlates with somebody who wants the government to be more conservative. So what would you view as the thing that we should be more conservative on governmentally?
I mean, I think the government should do less, essentially, and leave
Mhm.
more towards more to the community, whether that be like the church or the neighborhood or the family or whatever, to manage things. So in the sense of like government, it would just be like less involvement.
Mhm. So how does that I mean, you don't strike me as like a filthy fucking minarchist. I mean, maybe you are. I don't know. But do you think that's where your sympathies are, where you consider all these like dissident right thinkers, but realistically you're more libertarian or anarchist or minarchist?
Well, I think that like you have to recognize, like we talked about earlier, that if you
Mm.
cut government programs, you know, it's like when leftists talk about like abolishing gender, right? They can like acknowledge that there are like maybe bad parts of gender and then they want to
Mm.
abolish it. They want to rip it away, but they're also forgetting about, the benefits of gender roles and maybe some of the stories that we tell and how they benefit us, right?
I didn't watch your Vosh conversation. How did you explain this to him, and how did that go?
It went well. I We did have a
Mm.
conversation about gender roles, and
Mhm.
I don't think we disagreed too much. In fact, I got Vosh to admit that like getting rid of gender roles would not be good if we didn't have something to like meaningfully replace them, as far as like modeling behavior between people in relationships and so on.
Oh, no. How does chat like that?
So very, I don't know. I think a lot of his chat was like
What?
still thought that I had like dog shit takes, but I,
Uh-huh.
I've had this experience both with like Destiny and Vosh where I'll talk to them and they'll be like
Uh,
very reasonable and their chat will be like, who the fuck is this person? This like insane conservative who's getting you to agree on these things. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the she devil who's fucking yeah. Of course. And like that's actually really funny. But I'm trying to think of how to say this. There's people again quoting Batman because I'm a grown man. It's like the Joker thing where it's like I'm just a dog chasing cars. I don't even know what I'd do if I caught one. Like there's so many people like that who just want to like abolish everything, remove everything, destroy all hierarchy, do this, do that. They don't admit any level of utility to. Oh my God, can I just cringe with you for a second, and you can tell me if I'm being cringe?
Please.
Um, so race, okay? There's race abolitionists. They're
Mhm.
like, hey, we should eliminate race. It's a really toxic thing, and I can admit the toxic thing. The toxic thing is you see somebody who looks a certain way, and you're like, this person is like this demographic group. And as a result, I have all these preconceptions about who and what they are. And basically, I have to fight my preconceptions in order to deal with them as an individual. Okay, that's the cringe part of race. But then the advantage to race is if I say 6'4" white guy, brown hair, blue eyes, freckles, he's probably, Irish, German, or European. You pretty much know it's approximately me,
Mhm.
right? And you used a lot of like shorthand to get there that are racially associated. So if I say black guy, 6'4", light skin, 250 pounds, you might not have an exact representation, but by using the term black, you have an approximation. So in a world in which we think it's uncouth to describe people with shorthand descriptors, I don't know. There's a lot of utility, particularly for like law enforcement, for social identification, for ID cards, for governmental purposes, for all that kind of stuff. There's utility. So regardless of whether or not you have all these negative externalities, there's a lot of social utility that we use at it from a governance standpoint. And I don't know how how you get that utility without some kind of category.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe like if I can do something a little bit weird and like defend the position of the
Mm.
people that you're arguing against, I would say that
Mhm.
like they're not arguing that we want to abolish the race or the concept of race in the sense that we don't allow people to like describe skin tone. Um,
Mhm.
I think what they're saying is that like we should make sure that like our government policies are like blind to skin tone and our approach like in the sense of like I don't know
Well,
how we
now
run
I'm
company policies like blind to skin tone, etc.
Well, now I'm super confused because often these same people are super progressive.
Hmm.
And oftentimes right now, like maybe they want to be a race abolitionist like 500 to 1,000 years from now or
Hmm.
200 years from now or something like that, but they are the most sensitive advocates of non-race blind policy
Hmm.
now.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what
I
I'm
would
saying?
agree. And I think that like
Mhm,
the current progressive position on race is to be very hyper aware of race. Like you look at
mhm,
some of these authors who talk about like political blackness. Like I think it's Kimberly Crenshaw who talks about like the idea of like blackness as a political identity and the need to sustain that identity as a coalition political group to advocate for certain interests, right?
mhm,
And those interests, so when you look at like more recent authors like Ibram X. Kendi, who's talking about anti-racism, his
mhm,
conception of anti-racism advocated for by a black voting political bloc and a white progressive bloc is based on an idea that there should be explicit governmental favors for people of a certain skin tone. And so that's the
mhm.
current like progressive milieu on race. And it's not about like abolishing race in the moment or being like race blind on a policy level. I think that's right now. I think that that's a conservative position. So
Yeah, which is how fucking crazy is that?
yeah, it's insane.
Because it feels like everybody's accusing each other of weaponizing it. So if you're talking about like the hyper race aware progressives, they're being accused of weaponizing race to their personal benefit and to the benefit of their political group and popularity. If you're talking about the race abolitionists who are still sympathetic to current non-race blind policies, then they're accused of using it for temporary political gains while supposedly ultimately wanting to abolish it. Then, if you're talking about like people who want to be race blind in the moment, then they're supposedly ignoring all the problems of the current era and historical injustice. And then, if you have like the race conscious conservatives or libertarians, then they're just accused of being fucking Jim Crow style racist. So it's like I don't know how to phrase this, but it just feels crazy that roles have been inverted almost, but then everybody is accused of using it as a weapon. And that's I don't even know what the fuck to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the progressive side, you see this like continual need to co-opt language and like
Mhm.
redefine it as its opposite. Where
I'm
like
so tired of new definitions. They can
we used to
eat
think
my
that
butt.
like racism is when you like unfairly like privilege one racial group or over another. And now
Oh my
like
god.
racism is when you apply like equal privileges to everyone rather than privileging black people over another. And like the only way not to be racist is to actively privilege BIPOC people over everyone else, right? Like
Do,
I say that's
do,
going to sound like a joke to a
oh.
lot of people. This is literally what's like being positioned by people like Ibram X. Kendi.
Did you see oh man, I wish you saw it, but whatever the I forget which Jewish one it is. It could have been the ACLU, it could have been somebody else. But basically, like up until Whoopi Goldberg said the Holocaust wasn't about race,
Hmm.
on their website they had a statement saying that like racism was only when white people were racist to BIPOC people. And then
Mm-hmm.
Whoopi Goldberg said that like the Holocaust wasn't about fucking racism, and they fucking changed that definition the next day because they were like, "Oh, well, I guess when you're racist against Jewish people, that could still be a problem." And it's like, holy shit! Like it literally took just like anti-Semitism for you to not be a bigoted sack of shit. And that's like another thing too. When people are like, "Oh, well, you're like more lefty sympathizing than I'm not." It's like, dude, if some of these people said what they said to my fucking face, I would definitely not punch them in the nutsack. I would not do anything violent to them at all. But some of these positions are just they're untenable and they're terrible. And they set up like if I was teaching this to children, I would view it as evil. Like I don't even know what to do with some of it. It's so bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really horrific for sure. And this is like one of many areas where I think we need like a right wing vision that's able to unite people and that doesn't, play into certain tropes of of like racism or, intense like homophobia, bigotry of, any form.
Well, I'm going to ask you the BPF question, the Big Papa Fascist
Please.
question.
I had a
What
conversation with
is,
them recently.
yeah, actually, despite being very Christian and kind of not homo friendly, still to me a pretty cool and interesting dude. But my question is, he kind of asked a question like, what's the glue? Like, what is the thing that holds us together? What
Mm,
is the organizing principle in which we say right wing? Because right wing just basically means like pro hierarchy, but there's so many different kinds of hierarchy. You could say Christianity or race or monarchy, or there's so many different, or even like meritocracy if you're talking about like liberalism. There's so many things that could be considered right wing because it just means pro institutional.
mhm.
But there's nothing that really unites everybody who identifies with the label. So how do we get social conservatives, um, racial conservatives, um, and fucking meritocratic liberals to get on the same page and identify as a political bloc? Because that seems like a huge challenge.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I wish that I had like a silver bullet answer. Um, I will say that like personally, I'm partial to a sort of like conservative or like constitutionalist view of these things where
Mhm.
I do believe ultimately in like that in a broad culture like the United States with many, diversities of opinion and belief and whatnot, there needs to be a space for people to interact with each other peacefully and not
Mhm.
like force, their moral conception on everyone else. And so I think that there needs to be like some system that allows people to, group with people they agree with and to institute like some laws that like fit their moral prescriptions, while, allowing people, while not like infringing on everyone's rights. And I think that like the liberal model that is like set out in our constitution and our founding documents and essays written by, many of the founding fathers at the time is like a pretty good way of doing this. And my main hope would be that um there are more guardrails to prevent, I think, like the kind of continual liberalization and left wing movement that we've seen since the founding of the country.
So yeah, I know it's getting late and we've been talking for quite a while, but what that's fascinating to me. So like, what guardrails would you see? So for instance, like this is my problem because I think about the racial shit, right? Um, don't be fucking racist. Treat people as individuals as best you can. Don't let your fucking biases fuck with the way that you treat people, and view everybody as a human first. And if somebody's a dick, they're a dick, but don't let that determine how you're going to treat everybody from a different group. That's relatively easy. That falls in line with the liberal project. When it comes to religion, I don't want to say it's harder, but it is harder. Maybe you could do like the golden rule as something, kind of like everybody's got to abide by the golden rule, and if somebody doesn't believe what you believe in, then you can't fucking kill them. Like that should be a good start. But it doesn't feel firm enough unify. Do you understand what I'm saying, where it just doesn't feel firm enough to unify people, and then there's a bunch of like liberals and leftists who would also agree with these conceptions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that like you're going to have people who are like radical Islamists and have like very
Mm-hmm.
conservative views as a result of their Islamic faith. And you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have people who are, these trad Caths who are very conservative as a result of their Catholic faith. And you're going to have like pagans and Aristotelians and all of these people with like different moral viewpoints, and they're all going to have different solutions to these like individual granular problems that require moral answers. And
Mm.
I personally, I don't think it's like the role of the state to choose one of these like positions and say that like, yeah, we're gonna go with like the neo-paganist, worldview, and we're going to enforce that kind of moral virtue and those beliefs, or we're going to go with the Aristotelian, worldview. I think it's
Mhm.
the role of the government to set boundaries on like, you can't infringe on other people in these ways. You can't, violate, for example, like their freedom of assembly or their freedom of speech, or, you can't do these sorts of things. And then allow people to go into their communities and manage themselves with respect to those boundaries. And I think that
So
like the
how is this not liberalism that can then kick people in the dick, metaphorically?
what do you mean kick them in the dick?
Like, so let's say that like there's an Islamo supremacist and he's like, I'm gonna go into the LGBTQ club and I'm gonna scream at everybody that they're going to hell and then I'm gonna fist fight people. We already have cops that show up and arrest people like that. Same thing, so that's what I'm saying is like liberalism with a spine would be like kind of what I heard and what I would want ideally too. I just don't know how you define that basically. And like I did hear your definition and I agree with it. I just I'm trying to make it sexy, I'm trying to make it sexy. I'm trying to make it propaganda-y. I'm trying to make it how did we get the hip new kids to be like, yeah, I'm a liberal, but I'm not a fucking pussy. Like I'm a liberal, or I believe in the Constitution, or I'm a liberal conservative or something like that. But it doesn't like devolve into the 2016 classic liberal Dave Rubin, I agree, fucking Sargon of Akkad. Let me go find some Medium articles from somebody who has schizophrenia and then read it like it's representative of the entire left, fucking anti SJW shit. Because I feel like, by the way, I feel like we've already done this in 2014 to 2016, but then it devolved into bullshit. And that's what I'm worried about, is that by its nature, because it's syncretic, because it incorporates all sorts of different people with different perspectives, it devolves.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like two big criticisms that I would have of that sort of like era of classical liberal, like Sargon of Akkad, Dave Rubin perspective. Uh,
I agree.
yeah, and like two of these would be like, first of all, I think that it lacked um, any kind of strong like moral character, in that like it was very invested in being like anti-theist, but it didn't
Mm,
really come up with like a reason to adopt a moral framework to replace that. And I think that like Sargon of Akkad is one of these people who's done like a good job cultivating a sense of like what is moral since then. And I don't think that I don't think the movement needs to insist on like one moral framework necessarily being correct, but I do think it needs to insist on the idea that there needs to be like some value structure beyond hedonism or beyond pleasure. So I think that would be one. And
ooh.
two, I think that the movement, it got wrapped up in like Trumpism,
Mhm.
and people were very excited about Trump. They were hyped. They were going to take back the White House. Felt amazing. Everyone was riding this high. Trump got into office, and the predictable happened, which is not much, right?
Mm,
And I think there needs to be a recognition that the goal isn't just to like take the White House for 4 to 8 years. The goal
mhm,
is to really focus on developing a intellectual movement. And that's not something that like
mm,
I can do on my own, but it is the kind of thing that is going to give rise to idea systems that are going to bring people in. And so that eye towards like a maybe more long-term and mature approach to politics, I think is the kind of thing that's not going to run out of steam when you get your guy elected and realize that things aren't happening, or when you get this like big referendum to leave the EU, to Brexit, and then you realize that like, oh shit, we don't really have a plan, right? So
mm.
I would say that those are like two good places to start as far as giving this like classical liberalism maybe more of a spine.
Yeah, so what I heard there, I really liked it. And then I'm sorry that I'm putting the entire future of the right wing on your shoulders. So that feels a little unfair that I'm in my 30s and I'm like,
Some
hey,
21
would
transsexual on the internet. She's gonna do it.
right. Yeah. Well, I mean, if anybody's gonna do it, you got it. Like, it's,
Thank you. Thank
but
you for
the
believing in me.
yeah, but the so the two things that I pulled out of that were a moral order. So a moral order, not
Hmm.
the moral order, but an insistence on people developing, maintaining, sustaining a moral order for themselves and for those people around them. And then a positive, I wrote this down, a positive cultural right wing movement. And I keep saying positive. I don't, for anybody who's confused about my term, I don't mean rainbows and unicorns and shit. What I mean positive is if you looked at the anti SJW sphere, that's a lot of negative arguments.
Hmm.
What we shouldn't be. This is wrong. We don't like this. We want something else, this, that, the other. By positive, I mean this is our vision of the future. This is what we want. This is what we're striving toward. This is what we're pushing for. And so I think that my disgust with the current right wing could be insisting on specific moral orders that isolate and fracture the right wing, whether that's racial or religious or sexual orders that basically isolate us from each other to the point that we're constantly infighting, and then only having a negative movement where we're not saying what we want the future to be, we're just saying that other people are wrong. And so that's cool that you were able to really distill it down in those two bad things. And then I think we need to I mean, I'll be thinking about this for a while. Number one, you fucked me up twice in this conversation. One was basically this, where now we have to figure out actually what we're going to do. And then two was realizing that the pleasure machine is not going to be like taking ecstasy and getting sucked off for all of eternity. It's more going to be like I'm looking at a nice sunset,
Hmm.
you know, like in a lawn chair,
Just like,
which
okay,
like
good enough.
yeah, like, and I like sunsets and lawn chairs. So like that's cool. And if anything, that makes it more dangerous and more nefarious because it will suck in more people because it's not so extreme that it'll put people off. So that's where it's like what I thought was already a huge danger of our culture now became even more dangerous to me
Mm.
because it's like a warm bath or like a frog in the kettle. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't even know that it's boiling until it's too late. So that's terrifying.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm tired as fuck, and you gave me a lot to think about, and you kicked my ass at least twice. So can you please share any parting thoughts that you have? Shout yourself out. Tell the I think I have roughly I can't tell. I must have peaked at 125. I don't know how many people I have on YouTube, but I think it might be around 100. And then I got like half a dozen to a dozen people on Twitch. So shout yourself out to the peeps, and we'll call it.
Right on. Yeah. Taftaj, TAFTAJ. Follow me on Twitter. It's very NSFW. So we actually don't. Or do if you want to see that. Or follow me on Twitch. I do political discussions. I play video games sometimes. It's fun stuff. So yeah.
All right. Awesome. It was as cool to speak with you as I thought it was going to be. I appreciate you. I hope you have a beautiful evening. I'm going to think about what you said and try to create the new right
Yes.
that's not racist or evil or theocratic or whatever. So I'll try.
I
I'll try.
believe in us. We can do it.
We can do
All
it.
right. Thank you so much, Counterpoints. We should do this again sometime.
We will.
All right.
Catch you.
Good stuff, guys. Diagonal Dave. Hopefully that was fun. That was interesting. I'm glad that he seemed to enjoy the conversation so much. Good stuff. We're probably gonna probably gonna head out here. It's been lovely, guys. I am super tired. I'm gonna get to bed. I'm going to message people that I love, talk to people. It'll be good. Good night, everyone. I love you all. Thank you so much to Critically Thinking Veteran once again. He was great. Thank you so much for hosting me.